Hello everyone, this is Timothy Mark with Alexandria.
How's everybody doing today?
And we are a World Paranormal Research Society. The website is worldparanormalresearchsociety.org. The Gmail is worldparanormalresearchsociety@gmail.com. This podcast plays on many different platforms. Probably the one we get the most listeners on is Spreaker.com. And then it plays on iTunes, sometimes Tumblr, and it also plays on YouTube. So if you're watching this on YouTube, like and subscribe to our channel. And today we're going to talk about the Ogopogo. But before we get into the
Actually, I'm gonna correct you on it. We're gonna be talking about Ogopogo, yes, but another version of this particular sea monster or sea serpent that I'm well versed in through childhood is the Manipogo. So there's going to be two variations of these alleged sea creature, or lake monster is a better word, because we're not talking about Loch Ness monster, which is alleged sea creature. These Ogopogo and Manipogo are alleged lake monsters, and I'm well versed in that one. So Timothy will be speaking on the Ogopogo, and I'll be talking about the Manipogo.
Yes, that is true. And so I was thinking if there's anything that we want to say before we get started on today's show, today's topic.
I'm hoping I did put the word out, or feelers out on Facebook and Twitter, that I will be doing rune readings via Skype, and I'm just sort of tweaking out things, getting fine-tuning that as well. So there'll be 20-minute rune readings for $20, which is a steal. That'll be conducted via Skype. So I've asked people to contact me via email. The email address is alexandriaanthony7 altogether @gmail.com to book your appointment, and I will give you more details if you respond. Put in the subject line of that email rune readings, so it doesn't go into my spam filter, and I know that you're inquiring about these rune readings. So if you're interested, drop me an email with rune readings in the subject line of the email so I know what it's about.
And as World Paranormal Research Society CEO Timothy Mark here, I'm going to give y'all a 25% discount on that for tomorrow only, for Wednesday only. Wednesday's April what? Shit, I don't even know.
18th. Yesterday was the 16th or the 17th.
Yeah, so April 18th, you get the rune readings done for $15 for tomorrow only. Keep in mind, we won't be able to get 100 people in on one day. So if you want, go ahead and send your email to Alexandria Anthony and the number 7. So AlexandriaAnthony7 @gmail.com to book your Skype rune reading for tomorrow. And that will be done at a 25% discount. So it'll be $15, and then it goes back to $20 on Thursday.
And, with some of the podcasts that are going to be coming in the coming days and weeks, we're hoping to bring topics to you that are not in the mainstream, meaning we're not going to be always covering topics that are being done over and over again by different podcasts. We want to bring different subject matters that are not maybe spoken about as readily as other podcasts or other maybe paranormal teams out there. That's our goal, is to educate, enlighten you on not the everyday run-of-the-mill topics that people are sort of hearing day in and day out. We want to sort of give you a buffet for your senses, really, where you can explore. The paranormal, spiritual realms are so huge that we could even never begin to cover every topic or everything since the beginning of time. So we hope that these enlighten you, incite you, and educate you, and entertain you.
But before we get started on today's subject, what I wanted to talk about is thrash metal a little bit here for a few minutes. Slayer is probably one of the best known thrash metal bands out there, besides Megadeth and Metallica. But Slayer is really thrash metal. But there's another band called Death Angel that started in 1982, so they were in that 1980s thrash scene as well. And I just think that they're a lot cleaner musically, lyrically, and they're a lot crisp. More the music's more crisp, and it's really good. I really think that they outdo Slayer as far as songs and music and stuff like that. Even though they started playing in 1982, they had demos and stuff out in the early 80s, but their first tape, if you will. Now, when they started out, it was vinyl, but when they released the tape came out in 1987. It was called The Ultra Violence. And if you want a good thrash metal band that you might have missed during the 80s, check out Death Angel. They're really good, and they definitely beat Slayer. They got songs on there like Thrashers, Evil Priest, Voracious Souls, Kill Is One, The Ultra Violence Instrumental, Mistress of Pain, Final Death, and IPFS. And so, and just to give you a feel, all their songs are 5 minutes or over on that first one, except for Mistress of Pain. That one's only 4 minutes. But their first one, Thrashers, is 7, and it's a really good band. Did you get into thrash metal at all in the 80s?
Not really. I mean, I'm sure I've heard of them, but I was more into maybe in the 80s, U2, Def Leppard, Billy Idol. I did listen to, Iron Maiden, Metallica, and stuff like that. I mean, I think I may have heard some of them, but I don't think I can really consider myself totally into it.
Well, Slayer, they had on tape, the recorded stuff's really good, but the live shit just sucks, man. But here's a little of Thrashers from Death Angel. And that's just to give you an idea of the type of music that they have. I mean, you can tell that it was definitely in the 80s thrash scene. It's really, really good. And yeah, so I recommend for y'all to get any Death Angel CD out there. But yeah, their first one again is called The Ultra Violence, and that's with that song Thrashers. And that's definitely worth checking out, the Ultra Violence. But now we're going to get into this whole Ogopogo thing.
But I think before we get into that, can we kind of just talk about something that's been all over the news lately, and it's still tweeting today in regards to, I read this on Twitter this morning, that Starbucks is temporarily closing 800 stores so they can teach their employees racial sensitivity. And it seems like this is what the liberals have done to America, that you have to learn a special way to talk to minorities. You can't just talk to minorities like human beings. So I don't know what, I mean, that's all over the social media.
Well, here's the thing. If y'all haven't followed it, here's the situation. 2 black guys walked into a Starbucks, and they had to use the bathroom. They were waiting on a friend. So they went in to use the bathroom. Common courtesy is, and etiquette is, that you would wait on your friend to get there, because you might be buying that friend a drink. They might be buying you the drinks, but y'all want to maybe order all at the same time, and at least drink your drinks at the same time.
Well, isn't that even like when you go to a restaurant, if you're going out to dinner or you're meeting friends for lunch, don't you want to wait till for your friends are there so you can all eat your meals together, hot together? Doesn't that even make sense?
But I want to say this. Harvey Levin brought up a good thing yesterday. Well, what he was saying was, they have so many stores that you're bound to have one employee that's not going to act properly. I don't think that they should have shut down 800 stores because of this incident. This was an employee issue, not a company policy. So it was an employee issue at that one location. The employees no longer working at that location. The men were arrested, and I'm pretty sure Starbucks is about to compensate them pretty well. I mean, they're going to make more money from that incident than they probably would have made that day. I can guarantee you that. I mean, so another little thing that a lot of people don't realize is that Walmart Well, I'll let you comment on that here in a minute. But well, Walmart, when you going out the door at Walmart, when you buy your stuff, you have your receipt. You're the owner of that stuff. You have a right to exit that door without showing your receipt. That's a right. If they try to physically stop you, you can sue the store. You do not have to show your receipt for their peace of mind at the Walmart store. Once you've bought it, you can just walk right out the door.
Yeah, but isn't that the purpose why they have those things that buzz if you haven't scanned it? So, I mean, what's the purpose of having somebody accost you for your receipt and then going through that scanners and it'll beep?
Yeah, so, but going back to these two black guys that were arrested, I don't think that they should have shut down 800 stores to do it, but I guess they didn't want another incident, so they did what they did. But Starbucks is not a racist place. I've been in plenty of Starbucks. One of the things that you see in plenty of Starbucks is Vietnamese people, Japanese people. You see black people in Starbucks. So Starbucks as a whole is not a racist company. Matter of fact, they have black employees. You have one location with one employee that operated incorrectly, and that should not have happened.
Well, I don't think that this recent incident should cause the public to go on a witch hunt against Starbucks and protest and say we're no longer going to be customers of Starbucks. Let's get real, people here. Well, Starbucks can't control their employees. The only way they can control their employees is that if they act unethically and not according to a Starbucks policy, they should be let go from their employment. And
they have thousands of employees, so they're going to have one that acts inappropriately, as Harvey Levin said yesterday. But yeah, it was an employee issue, not a store policy issue. The guys will be paid, I'm sure, and they got a lot of media attention off of this. But the black community, because you're from Canada, the black community has always looked for any reason to protest and picket and
well, let's pick your battles. I mean, you know,
this one's they're definitely wrong.
But I mean, talking about Starbucks again, I'm from Canada, and I used to frequent a Starbucks to do video uploads specifically, and it was near a university and near a high school. So sometimes I would get there around lunch hour, and it's interesting that every Starbucks has its own, I guess, staff, and this is another example of staffing. I mean, you'd have students that would come into a Starbucks. One of the students would buy a Frappuccino or whatever it was, and his buddy, the 5 or 6 of their buddies would sit down and eat their school lunches while that one person out of 6 had a paid for a drink. And then there was even a Subway beside the Starbucks. The students would get Subway sandwiches and go eat them in Starbucks with that one person that bought a Frappuccino. So
right.
Come on.
And so they've always been tolerant to things, and this was just an isolated incident that was inappropriate. It should not have happened.
It got blown out of proportion.
But you cannot target Starbucks for this, because this is not their company policy. And as Alexandria said, they've always been tolerant to people just sitting in there. This manager obviously had a racist problem, and she acted inappropriately.
Well, this manager, whoever, or staff member that was obviously having a very bad day is now going to have a badder, worse day, because they probably lost their job. And
she lost her job yesterday. She's no longer with the company, which is that's my whole point. She's already lost her job.
But the damage is done.
So it's like, why would you be protesting, or what you call it when they're trying to not go to a location? Boycotting Starbucks when it's not a company.
Yeah, let's get real, people.
Let's take it to a rational level here, okay? The situation is being dealt with. There's no need in picketing and protesting the Starbucks. Maybe at that one location I could see it happening again today, but after that, let it go, man.
Well, I think after all the publicity, there's no way in hell Starbucks is going to allow their staff to act like that. But let's get to the subject at hand in regards to Ogopogo, and then next Manipogo.
You want to go first? Or you want me to go?
I'll let you go first in regards to Ogopogo.
Okay, Ogopogo, and I'm not gonna lie, I never heard of Ogopogo before until Alexandria enlightened me on it, and that's why on this show that you can find out things that you will not hear on other shows. But this is real. Ogopogo is real, and she's from Canada, and it comes from Canadian folklore, and what Ogopogo is listed as is called a lake demon or a lake monster, reported to live in the, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on the pronunciation of this, but it's Okanagan Lake.
Okanagan.
Lake in British Columbia, Canada. Ogopogo has been allegedly seen by First Nations people since the 19th century. The most common description of Ogopogo, now check this out, is between 40 to 50 feet long, and for the Canadians and other people out there, 12 to 15 meters. It's a serpent-like body, 40 to 50 feet long. That's a big ass monster, and resembling an extinct Basilosaurus. I'm having a hard time pronouncing.
It's almost like a plesiosaurus, but it's a Basiosaurus. It's an extinct sea or lake type of dinosaur.
And they also call it the legendary water spirit. And so before I go into the alleged sightings of the Ogopogo, I'm going to let you go ahead and give a description on yours.
I'm going to touch base on something that my family has a personal stake, or we've had personal sightings in our family in regards to Manipogo. And again, in Canadian folklore, the Manipogo is a lake monster that is said to live in Lake Manitoba, Canada. And the creature was dubbed Manipogo in 1957, and the name, again, echoing British Columbia's Ogopogo. And there is also a Lake Winnipegosis sea monster called Winnebago. So there's two.
Now, see, I've heard of the Winnebago in the Americas as well.
We're not talking about RVs. This is not the RV
I'm
Winnebago.
I'm not talking about the RV Winnebago.
Well, it sounds like the Winnebago RV, and but it's called Manipogo. Pardon me, I mispronunciation. Manipogo, and that's named because it comes from Lake Winnipegosis. And it's quite possibly could be the same creature, only because those two lakes, the Lake Manitoba and Lake Winnipegosis, are actually connected. So that's a water source that is connected. So it could be indeed one sea creature that travels between the two water sources. And this particular monster is thought to be anywhere from 12 feet to 50 feet long, and it's described as being a long, muddy brown body with humps.
That's the Mogopogo.
Manipogo.
Manipogo, and the Ogopogo is between 40 and 50 feet long.
Right, so this is like almost a mid-sized version, and it's a long, muddy brown body with humps, and the humps are very important because the humps show above the water, and it said it has almost like a sheep-like head. And it's very interesting because my grandfather was he was a trapper as well, but he lived around the area of he was always fishing in Lake Manitoba and Lake Winnipegosis as well, so he was a fisherman. And as a child, can you just imagine, 5 or 6 years old, we are Métis people, and my grandfather, being Métis, was a hunter, a fisherman as well. He told me stories that he actually seen the Manipogo. Can you believe that? He actually was in a boat. He told me that his boat was roughly about 18 feet long, and he told me that this particular monster that he seen while he was in his boat fishing was longer than his 18-foot boat. And he also specifically said that above the water there was humps like a camel. So he told me that he witnessed that several times.
Let me ask you this question, a couple of questions actually. Where was he fishing at?
He was actually fishing, where he was fishing was in Lake Manitoba.
Okay, so he was fishing in Lake Manitoba, but we're talking about your grandfather. Would your grandfather have been alive in 1926 by chance? Or born in 26, do you know?
I can't remember. My grandmother I think was born in 1911, so he was born in the early 1900s. He was alive he was a young man in 1920s.
Well, the only reason I asked that question is because, even though the native people of Canada have seen the Ogopogo for many centuries, we tend not to give validation to something unless we see it in our generation or our centuries. So the reason why I asked about 1926 is an alleged sighting in 1926 for the Ogopogo. A sighting is claimed to have occurred at the pronounce that mission beach, that Okanagan. Am I saying it right? Okanagan. The Okanagan Mission Beach. This event was supposedly witnessed by about 30 cars of people.
Wow.
So in 1926, you have 30 cars of people at the beach, the Okanagan Beach, that witnessed this monster. That's pretty crazy. In 1968, there was a guy named Art Folden. Now this is in 1968. He filmed what is claimed to be the footage of the alleged creature showing a large wake moving across the water. Now, it's good that he was filming this because we know that, at least in America, we had the hippie generation here that was on acid and seeing all kinds of shit. Did y'all ever go through the hippie generation up there?
The hippie generation was worldwide in the 60s. Peace, love, flower power was a universal movement.
Okay, so this guy actually has film footage that's out there of this creature. Well, what's supposed to be the creature moving across the water at this lake. And then a computer analysis of the footage concluded it was solid, three-dimensional object. So Folden, what he said about it was something large and lifelike when he was filming it, and then they did a computer analysis on it, which validates that, yeah, this was a solid thing moving, which would indicate that this could be the Ogopogo at 40 feet long. And there you go.
And actually interesting in regards, I'm going to switch back to the, Ogopogo is in British Columbia. If you're familiar with Vancouver, it's the Canadian province of British Columbia. My particular lake monster is Manipogo, and it's in Manitoba, another province in Canada. And there is also a provincial park on the west shore of Lake Manitoba named Manipogo Provincial Park. And if you're familiar with Saint Laurent, Saint Laurent is a very big Métis community in Manitoba, and it's a community on the southeast shores of Lake Manitoba, and they actually hold a Manipogo festival the first week of March every year. And since the 1800s, people have been claiming to see this sea monster or lake monster that they call Manipogo. And the local native population has legends of serpent-like creatures in Lake Manitoba going back hundreds of years. And my Aboriginal or Indian ancestry is Cree Indian, and the Cree Indians were in Manitoba. So that would be part of the local native population seeing these serpent-like creatures for hundreds of years in Manitoba.
Well, let me go back to the Ogopogo. Now, again, we're talking about two different things here, but they come from Canada, and they probably closely related as like cousins in the species or whatever. But in 2005, the footage that was filmed in 1968 by Art Folden, in 2005, National Geographic TV did a show called "Is It Real?" Now, this is in 2005, and they reviewed the film and concluded that it was indeed a real animal, but its size had been greatly overestimated. It was probably, they thought it was a waterfowl or a beaver, too far away to be identified. Now, this is National Geographic Television, so they have their own opinions, and their opinions differ from the computer analysis that was done in the 70s after this footage was taken in 1968. They disagreed with its size. It's kind of like any monster thing. There's always skeptics out there that are going to disagree with, oh, well, was it really this big? Was it that big? But even after they said they believed it to be a waterfowl or beaver, they did admit that it was too far away to really identify the size. So why would they try to discredit the footage? I don't know.
And, another interesting fact, eyewitness accounts like my grandfather that was a fisher and a hunterman, those are accounts that I think are highly credible. Cause,
well, your grandfather, yeah, you know your grandfather better than anybody.
He
why
was,
would he lie to you?
There's no reason why somebody fishing or trying to make a living by fishing and hunting would want to make up a story in regards to Manipogo. And I can remember, too, that growing up, my uncle had a farm, and he had over 3,000 acres of land, and we would go there every summer.
Who had that much land?
My uncle.
God, dog.
My uncle, actually, my uncle.
3,000 acres of land?
My uncle, yes. His name was Stanley Alfred. He actually was Icelandic, and he married my mother's sister. So it was my uncle who was an Icelander. And he was actually originally from Chicago, Illinois, but moved when he was a baby to that particular area. And he was a cattle farmer, and he had, like I said, 3,000 acres of land that was on the shores of Lake Manitoba. So when my parents were building their second last house, we were shipped off to my uncle's farm while my parents lived in a little truck camper when my dad was building his house. So we would be swimming in Lake Manitoba all the time. My grandpa would come, and we used to have a little thing when we were kids that we would jump in the water and we'd say, uh-oh, we'd scare everybody by putting a piece of log or a piece of wood into the water and say, the Manipogo's coming to get you. So even as a small child, we were aware of the legend of Manipogo monster, and 9 chances out of 10, though, we used to swim with garter snakes. So we'd turn around, it wasn't a piece of wood, it was actually a snake swimming, because garter snakes do swim in the lake. So we would always tease each other in regards to Manipogo. And actually, here's another thing about sightings in regards to Manipogo and Manitoba. A group of 17 witnesses, all reported, who were strangers to each other, claimed to have spotted 3 Manipogos swimming together. And that's just 17 witnesses not related to each other.
And that witness accounts is what gets me. You take 2 guys from National Geographic who considered the thing to be a waterfowl. And I'll tell you this, that those 2 guys does not overrule the 30 carfuls of people that seen it with their own eyes on the beach. So I definitely believe this thing to be real. And when so you can't believe everything that you see or hear on National Geographic, because the thing about National Geographic is they hire independent contractors. Like, they would hire somebody to go out and film footage or evaluate footage, and then they'll take their word and put it on there. So and these 2 guys were not very well known researchers or anything, and so I believe their account to be wrong. Going back to the Ogopogo, in 1978, there was a TV series, and I don't know if you remember this one. It was called In Search Of. I remember it because who's the guy that Leonard Nimoy, who played Spock on
Star Trek.
On Star Trek, man, In Search Of. I remember watching the reruns back in the late 80s and early 90s, and In Search Of was like one of my favorite shows because he actually hosted it. But they covered this legend, and they validated it to be something that was real too. And it was actually featured in 1989 on Unsolved Mysteries. Unsolved Mysteries in 1989 did a show called the Ogopogo, in one of their segments called the Ogopogo, and they actually validated the footage as well. So you have two shows, which In Search Of I give more credibility to, because they were the same researchers. They were well-known researchers that went around, and they would research different cases, versus National Geographic, which employs thousands of people like Starbucks to do different things.
And, going into validation again and touching on validation in regards to the Manipogo and Lake Manitoba, I mean, my uncle, you have to understand, like I said, he had over 3,000 acres that bordered on Lake Manitoba, and he had cattle. He was a cattle farmer, so he had, sometimes he had a couple hundred head of cattle that he would sell each year. But they would do the hay fields as well when it was haying season. So him and his wife and his kids would be on tractors during haying season, and a lot of like I said, the haying area would border the lake. So my uncle as well used to tell me stories that when he would be on the tractor, a lot of times he would be seeing humps in the lake that he couldn't describe. And I mean, they were too busy trying to get the hay in before the bad weather, because in Canada we have a limited haying season to get the hay process so you can feed your cattle over the winter. So, you know, I have many stories in regards to my uncle seeing very strange creatures that I hope in up and coming podcasts to bring to you. These are family accounts of these creatures. And I just want to get into one more thing about Manipogo before I go into different television things about Manipogo. In the early 1960s, Professor James A. McLeod of Manitoba University investigated the creature by trying to locate its remains. And his thought process was, if there was a breeding population in the lake, they should be leaving carcasses and bones where they die. And he found none. But that is not credible, because anybody knows that any carcasses that are on the lake shore, birds, seagulls, and all kinds of birds, even eagles,
not just that, wolves
would eat at it.
And bears would eat the bones too.
That's right.
Dogs eat bones.
That's right. So there's wild people that would eat the remains. So not finding remains on the sea, on the lake shore, doesn't validate or disvalidate anything. So that to me is not valid.
Let me go back into the evidence supporting the Ogopogo. In 1990, there was an owner who owned Peachland Marina restaurant called Mary's Country Kitchen. And this person photographed the Ogopogo crossing the lake coming from an island called Rattlesnake Island. Same year as this happened, a Canadian postage stamp, sorry folks, but a Canadian postage stamp with an artist's conception of the Ogopogo was issued. Now, these were issued based on the evidence that's been supported in a photograph from Mary's Country Kitchen.
I find that's very fascinating, and there's other mythical monsters that Canada has done postage stamps on. We're going to be bringing those in other episodes. But yes, Ogopogo did make the cut, and they did make a feature in Canadian Mysterious Monsters postage stamp.
One more thing before you go back into the Manipogo. In 2010, I'm sure a lot of people has heard of Josh Gates, the explorer who does Expedition Unknown and other shows on television. He did a search for the Ogopogo, and it was featured in an episode of Destination Truth. His team focused their investigation around Rattlesnake Island, and during the investigation, during that episode, he met many people who have seen this Ogopogo.
That's absolutely. So that's validation by getting eyewitness accounts that it's for a TV show. And I'm just going to briefly touch base on some alleged sightings and the credibility of Manipogo. And in 1935, there was a sighting by a timber inspector, C.F. Ross. Him and a friend saw the creature. 1957, 2 people saw a giant serpent-like creature in the lake. 1962, 2 fishermen saw a large creature like a serpent or a giant snake that was 60 yards away from their boat. The 1960s again, there was a Mr. and Mrs. Stoppel who saw a reptile-like beast surfacing about 30 feet from their boat. So these people are in their boat. There was a Sean Smith in 1989. Him and his family were visiting from Minneapolis, and they were on a camping trip, and they stayed at Shallow Point off Highway number 6 on Lake Manitoba. They saw a creature that had many humps in about 80 feet offshore. 1997, there were several reports by cross-country campers from Quebec staying at Lundar Beach Campground. I've been to Lundar Beach many times in my childhood, and they saw a large reptile head rise and fall in the water. Swimmers actually at that time in 1997 were evacuated from the water. Just like a shark attack, these swimmers were evacuated from the water at Lundar Beach.
Well, explain Lundar. You said you've been there, right? So explain what it's like for the people who's never been there.
Well, Lundar Beach is just it's a beach off of Lake Manitoba, and they have a campground. When we were children, we were avid campers. We went right across Canada, and we went right through a lot of the U.S., the top portion of the states of the U.S. So every summer, when we were off of school for the summer holidays, we went camping for 2 months straight. So my parents took us to a lot of places Lundar Beach is close where my grandparents are, so we would spend a lot of times when we weren't camping and cruising the countryside, we went to Lundar Beach. So it's a very nice beach, sandy beach with a lot of wooded areas. The fishing is so very, very good. So there's people that are swimming, fishing, camping, water skiing, you name it. There's everything at Lundar Beach. 2004, and we have a lot of commercial fishermen in Lake Manitoba. So these are just not hobby fisher. These are people that make their living commercial fishermen. They're actually originally from Newfoundland. Reported several of their fishing nets had been torn up by what seemed to be an ocean shark or a killer whale. And so they're saying that the nets were not nibbled on, but actually the nets were torn in half by huge bites. And, pardon me, the sites go on and on. 2012, August 9th, 9 p.m., just off the shore of Outlet at Twin Beach Road, surfaced twice, showing a scaled, sawtooth, jagged back of almost what they thought even a giant sturgeon. And a lot of you might say, okay, she said giant sturgeon. You have to remember too, in Manitoba, we have lake sturgeon, and look up what a sturgeon is. A sturgeon is a prehistoric fish that can live hundreds of years, and they can be 20 feet long to 30 feet long. They have scales, they have fins. I know in the Red River in Lockport, Manitoba, I used to go fishing with my dad a lot in his boat, and prior to the early 1900s, put this into perspective. In Lockport, when they were still using a horse and a wagon, we used to have people that would have a horse and a wagon pulling lake sturgeon out of Lockport in the Red River. They were massive, they were huge, but now sturgeon is a protected species because it is a prehistoric fish. You're not allowed to catch them. You'll be fined. You'll lose everything, folks. So they are an endangered species that is protected. So a lot of people think that they could be lake sturgeon, but not too many lake sturgeon that I know have humps on it like a camel, like my grandfather describing it.
So in going back to the Ogopogo, in 2013, y'all have a television show over there called The Amazing Race Canada.
Yes.
Season 1, they had team members submerge into Lake Okanagan to get a clue attached to a sunken statue of the Ogopogo.
Wow, that's amazing.
Why was this statue sunken?
Well, it's supposed to be a serpent, so they just had it sunk. I mean, you're not going to have his hump showing. How could you hide a clue in humps?
Who the hell can see the damn statue? Why would they make the statue and then sink it?
Yeah, but you'd have to go underwater. You'd have to dive for it. I mean, why put a clue on a hump that's outside of the water? I mean, you have to dive for it, just like sunken treasure.
I understand that, but what I'm saying is the statue existed prior to the show.
But they sunk it for the show to make it more interesting. I mean, you can't have it easily accessible. Come on. And also, talking about TV shows, Manipogo was featured on an episode of the television documentary series Northern Mysteries. So there's been a lot of, so many sightings in regards to Manipogo. Again, like I said, my grandfather seeing it many, many times with his boat, and there's even websites that are called, different websites. CKND TV actually is a TV show in Winnipeg or Manitoba. They did a lot of accounts in regards to fishermen. There's been Canadian newspapers, and even members of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police Department on patrol in local Indian reserves had seen the Manipogo as well.
I want to go back to the Ogopogo, the early Indian legends before television existed. So, the Ogopogo was listed as what was believed to be a previous incarnation, according to Indian legend, as a bloodthirsty killer. Ogopogo, some believe, has its roots in native Canadian Indian legends of a beast called the Nantucket. Nataka that would demand a live sacrifice from travelers for safe passage. God, I can't even talk. That would demand a live sacrifice from travelers for safe passage across Lake Okanagan hundreds of years ago, where Indians believed would venture into the lake. They brought chickens or other small animals, so the early Indians were sacrificing animals to this thing.
Wow, so that's the local indigenous population were well aware of the Ogopogo, and as well in Manitoba were well aware of the Manipogo as well. And actually recent sightings of this cryptid have been known from basically at least 1908. And the creature, again, there's several sketches. There's a gentleman saw the creature in 1950 when he was 18. There was a sketch about it. And then two fishermen saw a creature almost like a giant worm. And I'm seeing some of the alleged 1962 photograph by two fishermen. Looks like a serpent, and I can clearly see a hump on it as well. And according to the Winnipeg Free Press, which is a newspaper, the Manitoba government decided to name that area, the park, Manipogo Provincial Park, after the lake monster. So the Manitoba government changed the name because there was credibility to the specific lake monster.
Now you describe what the Manipogo looks like. I never described what the Ogopogo looks like other than length. It is said to have multi-humps, be with green, black, brown, or gray skin. So it can have green, black, brown, or gray skin. And the head is that looks like a snake.
Wow. And the sightings of Manipogo actually vary from different people.
But hold on. Some, going back to the description of Ogopogo, some people say that its ears is really horns, which looks like ears or horns. That would almost sound like a dragon.
It could be a dragon to me or something, because there are some sightings of the Manipogo that says almost a sheep-like, and a sheep or a goat has horns as well. So I mean, it's different on how people describe it, and certainly it is a creature of legend. And really, we have to really decide to evaluate what is the possibility of these creatures existing. I mean, creatures in folklore like Loch Ness, Chupacabra, Sasquatch, all these are kraken. A kraken is actually like an octopus.
Well, yeah, and going back to the Ogopogo, y'all have a newspaper up there called the Vancouver Sun.
Mm-hmm.
In 2011, the Vancouver Sun put this picture up.
Wow,
and you can see
it's a still of a 2001 video.
Yeah, and in 2011 they put it up, and it was in the newspaper of the Ogopogo. Now, to me, the Ogopogo sounds like almost a dragon, to be honest with you. It's because we don't know if it has feet or not, because people's only seen it from the humps and the head, but it could have feet, such as a dragon, like small feet. Maybe it could do land and sea, water, or whatever. And so, to me, it sounds and looks almost like a dragon would.
And, really for me and from my perspective, I really have more than what you could say is or consider a passing interest in these folkloric, mystical, unusual, and really surreal beings. Because where I come from in Manitoba, actually, where we live is an ideal location, and it's nestled between the Riding Mountains and the Duck Mountains. My grandfather used to hunt in Riding Mountain National Park, the Duck Mountains, and really they're surrounded by plenty of lakes, again, most notably Lake Manitoba, Winnipeg, and Winnipegosis. And you have to understand that these lakes in North America, or Manitoba specifically, are dark, large, deep, cold water, and these lakes were formed over 10,000 years ago during the last ice age. They are the last remaining remnants of what they call glacier lakes, because they were formed by a glacier receding and leaving cold water behind the glacier.
Well, let me go into the first non-Indian sighting. because we know that in early Canadian history, the natives there had an understanding with this creature and would sacrifice animals to it. But the first Caucasian sighting was in 1873, and it was by a lady named Mrs. Susan Allison. She was a British Columbia pioneer and author, and she seen it near her home in Sunnyside Ranch, which is located at today's Quails Gate Winery in West Kelowna. And so her description of it was a snake-like creature which closely mirrored the often reported local native legend about the water demon. So she was validating what she had heard from the Native Americans. She seen it with her own eyes. And this was in 1873. And again, we talked about the 30 carfuls of people in 1926. In 1947, a number of boaters all saw the creature at the same time. So in 1947, they all seen it at the same time, and described it as having a long body, 30 feet in length, consisting of about 5 sections separated each other by about 2 foot in space. So it had, I guess the 5 sections would have been between the humps. They didn't give a really good indication about the humps there, but there appeared to be a forked tail, of which only 1/2 came out of the water. So this talks about it having a forked tail. Again, you go back to looking at with the dragons, the people who call dragons, and maybe this is a dragon. 1964, a perimeter family was able to take a photo of what they saw in the lake. There's a lot of photos and videos of this thing. This is not like Bigfoot. There's many photos and videos of this thing. The question is, what is it?
And I mean, the same applies to Manipogo in Manitoba, Canada, where, you know, after accumulating several accounts,
I don't know if you can see that photo right there where you see it coming out of the water.
Right.
That was in the 1981 photo. But go ahead.
So if you kind of put together all the documented sightings and all the descriptions that everybody gives with these documented sightings, they all come to almost similar conclusions, where this Manipogo is a muddy colored creature that has many humps and anywhere between 12 feet to 50 feet long. On its head has a single horn. Its head is small, flat, and looks very much like a dinosaur, and a giant serpent-like creature, large creature like a serpent or a giant snake, reptile-like beast. And come on, folks, we cannot confuse this with a floating log, a large sturgeon, a wave, or like they like to say, a boat wake. And if you don't know what a boat wake is after somebody rips by you on the lake going 100 miles an hour, you know, and it's the rip from the engine of the motor.
And the thing is, we're looking at the photos, we're looking at the videos, and it's easy to determine what this thing is as far as it's some creature that has not been caught yet. And now, with the Manipogo, you said it has 1 horn. With the Ogopogo, yes, it says it has 2 horns. So that's the difference between the two right there as well.
And, you know, there's been so many eyewitness accounts, drawings, there's been video taking of this particular, and to have the Manitoba government change the name of a provincial park to Manipogo Provincial Park means there's something there, folks. So that means the government is validating that there is indeed a mysterious creature. They're not saying what it is, but they're validating that all these people have seen, you know, since hundreds of years.
It's got photographs, still photographs and video, and you can't deny that. That's evidence.
And I mean, as a child, I would listen to my grandfather tell me many stories, and I hope to incorporate a lot of different mythical beings in these podcasts, but he was an eyewitness that seen the Manipogo for himself. His boat was over 18 feet long, and he said the creature was over 18 feet long.
Well, this was your granddad.
My grandfather.
And he's passed away.
Yeah, his name is Albert Paul. That was my mother's father, and I spent many summers going on his trap line, teaching me things in the bush. So my grandfather was a credible person. He was a hunter, a trapper, a fisherman. He had no reason to make up these accounts, and I believed him.
Well, besides that, even in taking your grandfather's account and then taking to all the hundreds of people that have seen it with their eyes.
And, you know, to kind of, people might say again, maybe it's a lake sturgeon because there are lake sturgeon there. But, you know, where my my father currently goes fishing, and where he has a permanent site. He's had a permanent site, or he's gone fishing there for over 50 years. And I used to have a permanent site there as well. So they actually have lake sturgeon in Lake Winnipegow. We call it Winnipegow, and it's near Bissett, Manitoba, where my father did see a lake sturgeon, and he said that he actually I guess he was looking out from his boat dock, and he said when it was a very sunny day, and the lake sturgeon actually came out of the water and did a turn and a flip in the sun, and he could clearly see the difference between that one was a lake sturgeon.
Well, lake sturgeon don't get to be 30 and 40 feet long.
They can.
40 feet long?
They can get 20 feet long, up to 20 feet, and they live.
That's not 40 feet.
No, but you know, it could be a small one, or you know.
No, I mean the footage that we're seeing. It's not like...
That's why it can't be a lake sturgeon.
No, because the still photograph I just showed you a while ago, you got perception there because you have something to compare it to. You have trees.
Right.
And there's a long row of trees, and this thing outstretches that whole row of trees.
And that's your baseline measurement.
Yeah.
So if you can do a baseline measurement, and again, if a lake sturgeon can live hundreds of years. This is documented. This is now a protected species in Canada. Lake sturgeon is an ancient fish, and it's a prehistoric fish that again can live hundreds of years. Why couldn't a lake monster as well live hundreds of years, or be left over from the last ice age and all these lakes in Manitoba?
I can see why with the Ogopogo, because I'm looking at a really clear picture here, and why they didn't give it a very good hump description. Some people says it has humps, some people says it doesn't. But if you look at this, you see the little things right there in the middle.
Right. That could be, to me it looks like humps. There's one, at least
it could be humps,
indented hump.
But the eyewitness description says that it was like separated by about 2 feet for each 5 sections there. And you have 2 of them right there together. And they do look very snake-like.
It does. And you know what? I have not read one account where somebody has said it looks like an eel, a giant eel. And
well,
eels,
no fucking eel. Eels don't get to be 40 feet long.
We don't know. I mean, these are glacier waters in Manitoba that were left over from the last...
There's no way an eel gets to be 40 feet long.
There's no... How do we know that? We just have not caught one. So
you're thinking that Ogopogo could be an eel?
But you know,
I'm thinking it's more closely related to a dragon. But
I think it's a lake monster.
If it's an eel, I want to catch that joker and put it on my wall.
But to that fact, where we used to go,
look at that right there. I mean, folks,
there's no doubt. There's
amazing pictures of this thing. And video.
Yeah, these are people that hunt for these particular mythical creatures, and this is the evidence that they've caught on video, still photography, and their own sketches as well.
Here's one about 20 feet long. You can see a little. It's kind of blurred there, but
right. It looks almost like a plesiosaur, like they say that Loch Ness is.
And here you see the snout of it. That almost looks like an alligator.
It could be, or some type of a reptilian kind of creature. But I truly believe in Ogopogo and Manipogo that these creatures are out there, folks. They've existed for hundreds of years, and just because we have not seen a carcass washing up on the lake, everybody will know that once a carcass washes up on the lake, we have birds of carrion, wolves, even raccoons or scavengers. There would not be anything left of the corpse. And I want to tell you a quick story before we wrap this up, is that in the campground in Lake Winnipegow near Bissett, Manitoba, we actually had a couple boys that were my youngest son's age, Nicholas, that they would all play together. And they actually, there's a lot of abandoned gold mines from the early 1900s, late 1800s on Lake Winnipegow. And they actually found a skull of something that looked like a huge snake. And they brought it. Even my dad couldn't say what the skull was, but it was massive, almost like the shape of
Did you think about keeping it?
They did. It was almost like...
Where's it at?
The boys have it. It's almost like a big anaconda. Like, it was huge, and we thought it was maybe a huge northern pike because we have huge jackfish in that lake, but there's no way. The teeth were not even similar to a northern pike or a jackfish, but that would have been evidence, and I hope that those young fellows took it to a museum or a university to validate. But I'm telling you, from my family's eyewitness accounts, these creatures are out there, folks. I can clearly tell you that.
Yeah, they're out there, and there's just overwhelming evidence about it, and it's something that we really don't hear about here in America. But apparently it's all over the world, and we just haven't been taught about it.
Well, the most famous sea creature, as everybody would know, is the Loch Ness Monster. If anybody knows that, if you're part of the Grant clan like I am, and our Loch Ness, there's that old rundown castle on Loch Ness. That used to be a clan Grant castle. That used to be part of our land, but that is where Loch Ness Monster is said to reside.
Yeah, but everybody's heard about the Loch Ness Monster, but nobody's really heard, at least here in America, about the Ogopogo or the Manipogo. And remember that y'all heard that here first, folks.
And like I said, the Canadian government, Canadian Mint, or Canadian postal system has made a postage stamp featuring the Ogopogo monster, and we hope to touch on other mythical monsters that the Canadian government has made into postage stamps, because these are real, folks. Open your eyes.
And keep in mind, these monsters don't know borders, so if they're in Canada, they can damn sure make their way to the U.S.
So we hope you guys found this interesting, enlightening, and very educational and very entertaining.
Remember, for the thrash metal fans, check out a band called Death Angel. And that'll be it for us. Later.
Take